I've talked a lot about my prior experience working in the state of Maryland, but this is a customer summit, and my first interaction with Socrata was as a customer. I was working in the state of Maryland, and we were running StateStat, and StateStat was being run and driven, and the work that we were doing was based on spreadsheets, much like a lot of the performance programs in your governments. And I was getting increasingly worried about the fact that we didn't have a repository for our data. We didn't have the ability to sort of conceptualize our data in any real way that was going to sustain once the Martin O'Malley administration ended. And Brian Sivak, who's now the CTO at HHS, was working in the state of Maryland with us. And we tried to figure out ways to solve this problem in a number of different ways. We tried using traditional BI tools. We tried using databases that we were sort of homegrown. We tried, and Brian said to us, have we ever thought about using open data as a way to power what we're doing in performance? And at that time, I didn't even know what open data really was. It wasn't really in the hearts or minds of anyone at the state level. And I think that it was really something that I never even would have thought about, and also gave me a lot of pause, because a lot of the work that we were doing in the room in Maryland was work that wasn't public. We were not sharing the data that we were necessarily using. We were using sensitive data to drive results. We were thinking about data in a way that was not necessarily really meant for public consumption. And we were also having really hard conversations, and we would have this dialogue, and I would have this fight with the governor. I'm sure Matt probably has this fight still with the governor, where the governor would come in and say, I want every single one of your StateStat meetings to be live streamed. Everyone should be able to see it. And I know that you guys actually do that sometimes. And I would say, well, okay, then the meetings are going to change. They're going to turn into these sessions where they're going to be essentially people coming in to create presentations because they're very public. And the work that we were doing in the room was really driving results. And we were actually making decisions that were impacting people's lives in the state of Maryland. We were driving at the real core business of what we were doing in Maryland. And we were sharing a lot of it with the state, where we were sharing a lot of it with the constituents, we were sharing a lot with but a lot of it was raw, was ugly. The data wasn't great, the quality wasn't good. We didn't know what we were doing. And so Socrata came in and partnered with us, and they said, look, we want you to, we want open as default. We want you to share this data. We want you to get this data out. But we can certainly work and try to figure out a way for you to be able to tell the story of what you're doing, for you to be able to give the data to the people of the state of Maryland that are going to help them sort of drive those results without having to compromise kind of what you're trying to preserve in the process and in the business of administering government. And so, I didn't believe it was possible. I mean, we'd had fits and starts with other people, and it's still a work in progress in the state of Maryland. It's still a work in progress with what we're doing. But open performance was really born in those early conversations, and GovStat really came sort of birthed out of what we were doing. And so this is really a session that is I'm very proud to be part of this session because these are practitioners who are using the solution to really drive performance in their governments. I'm really proud to be joined by Matt Power, who took over for me when I left the state of Maryland and has done a great job at really transforming even much further and much wildly more than I could have dreamed of the program since I left, including doing some really great legislative work, working with our legislature. So I can't wait to hear from him today. And then there's Kate and Julie, and I've referred to Kate and Julie probably every time I've been on the stage since we started, because they have been doing some of the most innovative storytelling to the public, to engage the public in their performance program in the city of Kansas City. And it's not only just about that storytelling, but it's also about the work that they're doing to engage the community, because in the work that we're doing, we need data to be that call to action. We cannot go at the work of making the lives of the citizens better without the citizens being part of the process. And I think Kansas City has really found that balance with the integration of their survey data and the way that they have made this entire process a call to action. So today's session, they're going to talk about their programs. We're going to see some of the work that they're doing, and then we're going to have a talk. And hopefully, this will be a dialogue. I know we have a lot of performance practitioners in the room, so I really want to make sure that you're getting from these folks that have been working with the tools for a long time, some of this sharing of best practices, this platform that we're creating. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it off to the panel. I think we're going to start with Kate and Julie. So they're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to sit down.
Is that the clicker over there?
Yep, the clicker is right here.
Thanks, Beth. We're really excited to be here. You'll forgive us for being a little hoarse. There was some yelling that had to be done last night. So as Beth mentioned, Kate Bender, Julie Steenson, AKA Kate and Julie, AKA Julie and Kate. We even have some people in the city who are experimenting with Cooley. I wish I was kidding, but that's true. Just to give you a little bit of background on us and who we are, what we do. We are basically 2 of 3 staff members in the Office of Performance Management, which was a division created by our current city manager when he came into the position in the fall of 2009. So we're coming up on our 5-year anniversary. And we're 3, we're kind of in the process of, we depend really heavily on one of our management fellows. We're hoping to kind of bring him in full time, so maybe we'll get up to 4. But we're really a centralized point for collection, analysis, reporting all things data, both the analysis side and the communication out. And we both we're the coordinators of the StateStat meeting, which preceded the StateStat dashboard by about a couple years, I guess. So, and now as well as the primary owners of StateStat, the dashboard. So I'm going to give you a brief overview going into sort of our dashboard and how we're using it, and then Julie's going to cover some of that information. But this slide, I realized after yesterday I probably should have just subtitled it "What Jonathan Schwabish Said," because that's, listening to him talk, it was really, it was great for us because the message that he was preaching about how much communication matters of your data is something that we preach all the time internally. I think when we got started, we spent a lot of time on the analysis side and then have realized so much over the last 5 years that the communication and the visualization point is just as crucial as good analysis. So, and for us, when we look at it, we think that it becomes even more true when the data is a really key part of the conversation, as it is in performance management for us, for most people. And also as the audience gets more and more diverse, and by that I mean, just different stakeholders in the room. And by definition, our performance management programs are very diverse because they're including citizens, elected officials, community groups, business groups, citizens. So with all of that, we have to think really carefully about who's in the room in terms of how we're visualizing. And that all also underscores why the dashboard and why the tools that we have are so important to us, because that's at the core of what we're trying to do, is communicate our data in a thoughtful way. So this seems like a bit of a jump going into our citizen survey, but that's kind of what Julie's going to talk about a little bit more in the context of our dashboard, and Beth alluded to as well. Our citizen survey is really at the core of our performance management program. It's something that we spend a lot of time on and talk about a lot, and it's sort of our first love. We are really like big time citizen survey dorks. So, but to give you a sense of, this is not something that happened overnight. It's been a big process for us. We've had a citizen survey for a long time. Up here it says 2005, but actually it goes back further than that. That's the baseline year we use because that's the year that our current survey compares most to. Before that, I think they use some different instruments, but it goes back, I think, even to the 90s, maybe earlier. And that history of the survey is really important because it's been a consistent piece of information, something people are used to. And they spent, our city auditor's office actually oversaw the survey for a long time, and they spent a lot of time on the methodology. I mean, working with our contractor, thinking about it, being just making sure that it was really the best sample it could be, and that methodology was what we wanted it to be. So that baseline, that made a difference. Fast forward, if that's sort of the benefit, the good side of our history. The downside was it was being undertaken by the city auditor's office, who did a great job with all of things administration and reporting. They put out a really comprehensive report, but there really was no way in our system that that data was integrated, and we didn't really have a performance management system, but even so, it wasn't integrated into anything actionable. That's not their role in our organization. So it was sort of a report out annually. Sounds great, put it on the shelf, we'll see you next year. And at the same time, the data weren't very good. And so that made it even more of an impetus to put it on a shelf. Our group took over administration of the survey in 2011. And really, since then, and I want to make this point before we get to the dashboard part, we have spent a lot of time building a culture around the survey within City Hall. When we took it over, it was a second thought. Especially department staff had no interest in it. You'd show the data, they would, almost roll their eyes. They did not want to talk about it. They did not feel like it was representative of their operations. It was just something that people did. They felt like, to hold them accountable to something that they didn't feel was fair. We spent a lot of time, we rewrote the survey. We did a really big rewrite with their input, taking into account how they see their operations and what they see as the things influencing citizen perception. We expanded it to add in more service areas so it could be relevant to more people. And then we just brought the data to our system over and over and over again. It was inescapable. We do our administration quarterly, so it was every time we had a performance management meeting on a topic, it was, and here's the latest citizen survey. And I think after about a year of that, they probably were like, I guess I should probably pay attention to this. I don't think it's going away. And our council then really took the lead from there, and they grabbed it as being a core indicator, and they really hadn't been big proponents either. So building that internal culture around the survey, I think, is what has led us to the point of being able to showcase the data in the dashboard and in other ways, but as really our highest level outcome measurement, which is how we see it. And we're actually continually moving forward, trying to do more, and but we're actually, our next step in terms of analysis of the survey, we're working with Professor Alfred Ho from University of Kansas on a grant-funded partnership to delve even further into our citizen survey data and to build a model based on 311 and crime data and any data sets we can get to try to help understand what's driving satisfaction. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie, who's going to talk about our dashboard specifically.
All right, good morning, everyone. As Kate and Beth said, I'm Julie Steenson. This is our dashboard powered by Socrata. These are the tiles on that dashboard. Just a little bit of background on how we actually came to have these specific goals and topics on the dashboard. As Kate mentioned, we had a set of performance management meetings, which were very internally focused, weekly meetings with the city manager, just to get together to talk about very minute operational issues, mostly centered around our 311 data, service level things, work order data. So then Mayor Sly James, during his campaign, said, hey, I want one of those cool stat programs like Baltimore and the state of Maryland have. And so he came into office, and we set about implementing that for him. And what really came out of it was a collaborative process. He wanted it to be public. So as Beth said, all of our stat meetings are public. They're archived on the website. So if you're extremely bored, go out and watch one. And
Totally not true. That's actually really exciting.
It's, there's a lot of great dialogue going on between the mayor, the city manager, and then department staff, division managers, people who usually are so busy that they never see the light of day and never get an opportunity to interact with the leadership. So it's really a great way to bring people together to talk about important issues, all centered around data. And so what we use our dashboard for is we report out in those meetings using the dashboard. They are organized around the council's priorities. They have a set of priorities that they have adopted and set performance metrics to. So the dashboard just is a reflection of those priorities, and in those priority areas, public infrastructure, economic development, so on and so forth. And as you can see, when they went about choosing their performance metrics, 12 of the 19 priorities turned out the highest level priority for them was to increase citizen satisfaction. they started to adopt that. They understood that citizen satisfaction is our highest priority, and customer service is what we're in the business of. It's not about paving the streets for the street's sake. It's paving the streets so the citizens have a good road surface to drive on. So we set about working on these measures, and as I said, this is at our highest level in our goal tiles. But as you sort of delve further in, we wanted to make sure that citizen satisfaction was just one data point that told the highest level story, but then you can move down from there and understand more and more about the city operation. So we use our pages really as a storytelling device. We start with citizen satisfaction, as I said, on 12 of the 19 priorities, and just sort of move down all the way into things. This is our animal control dashboard, into our live release rate, how many pets in our city have licenses, a little bit more just operational data, and also how quickly our animal control officers are able to arrive on scene to assist a resident with an animal control need. So we try to incorporate all levels of sort of the performance metric continuum, just to make sure that we are telling a complete story about what's going on in our city and with our different divisions and departments. One thing we also do as a way to communicate out, kind of taking it out off the computer screen, is we take some of those data points and we do some cool, we've done 2 years of cool visualizations using city staff. So the first image there, the +5, those are all city employees. That reflects a 5% increase in the citizen satisfaction with Kansas City as a place to live. Highest increase we'd ever seen in a 1-year period. So, that's 5 points, and anyone who does polling knows that's a pretty big jump. So we are now at that point, we're at 75%. We're now at 76% of our citizens satisfied with Kansas City as a place to live. And we wanted to make sure that we incorporated the employees of City Hall into that story. So we asked them to form the +5, because it's really their hard work and their work to improve those metrics and their focus on those metrics that has really made the difference. This year we did a +20, or the Big 20. That is a reflection of a 20% increase in citizen satisfaction with the image of Kansas City. And again, we attribute that to the hard work of our employees. So you can see those are city employees. I think Kate and I are somewhere in that photograph, holding signs from citizens, comments from citizens that have either come in through our surveying work or through our 311 system, complimenting the work of the city and city staff, individual staff members. Most of the signs are held by the people who got the compliment. So it was just a great way to incorporate citizen survey data, bring the employees into it, and then just take what was on our dashboard and really blow it out into a community-wide event that got press and let everyone know what we're doing. So again, this is us, and I think that's really all we had.
All right, Matt, why don't you talk a little bit about what's happened?
So I guess I'll start off by saying, I only have a few slides. I want to give you a little bit of an overview about StateStat. When we let Beth leave the O'Malley Brown administration, we were sure that anyone who bought a Socrata license would be educated on StateStat before they were allowed to even purchase the license. That said, I want to make sure that you do have some familiarity with what we do, and I think the more interesting part hopefully will be some of the questions and answers that we get into after that. But I will start with asking if you can still remember the 4 tenets of StateStat, Beth?
Oh, timely and accurate information shared by all.
Awesome.
Effective tactics and strategies.
Awesome.
Rapid deployment of resources.
Excellent.
And my favorite, relentless follow-up.
Excellent. Thank you. So, and that really is what it's all about for us, particularly the last one, as Beth mentioned. And I think, the first one, the information piece, we were blessed with a leader who just saw from the very beginning that, getting the information out there and making sure everyone had access to it was going to be a game changer for the state of Maryland. And so when you take something from the municipal level to the state level, it gets a little bit tougher in some respects, right? You're so much further from the end use, you're so much further from the service delivery, and in some respects it makes it harder, in some respects it makes it that much more important to do. So I work in the governor's office. I've got a team of about 7 analysts and an office manager, And we really go through agency templates and agency data that they report to us on a monthly basis. And as Beth said, they're reporting to that still to us for the most part in Excel, and we're working to make migrations to get the data's out there, but we're working to get more data into the portal. And so they produce memos that go to myself, that go to the governor, the chief of staff, Department of Budget Management, Department of Information Technology, and all those folks sort of sit on my side of the table there. And we read those memos in advance. The agencies come to the meetings blind. They don't know what the agenda is. They don't know what we're going to talk about. The notion being that if Governor O'Malley's appointing you to be the secretary of any of the different cabinet level agencies, you should be prepared to come in and talk about any of the StateStat data that you are responsible for, because that's the data that you're supposed to be managing your agency to. That's the data that you should be looking at on a daily basis to make sure that you know what's going on within your agencies. So those memos usually have about a third of the follow-up and the relentless follow-up. And every meeting we begin starts exactly where we left off at the last meeting. It has about a third of new analysis from our analysts of what's in the template and what demographic or what key statistical changes they see going on within the agency template. And then a third of it is just things that we're trying to bring to value added for the agencies about what's going on across the country. You would think the folks who are cabinet secretaries in their respective fields and have risen to the tops have the time to read through, Innovation Magazine and Governing and GovTech, and the truth is they don't, right? Because everyone's too busy doing their own work. And so some of the value added we bring is just bringing people to the table, and we do it on an incredibly consistent basis. So every cabinet secretary comes in every month, reports on their data, we're grilling them, we're asking them questions. But the important part about it is it's also collaborative. You have to have some collaboration with the agencies, because ultimately the real work gets done in between our meetings, and they're the ones who are really making it happen in between those meetings. What we do is raise issues, bring the power of the governor's office to the table. We can force meetings. We can force people to get together. We can force sister agencies that don't want to sit in the same room together to sit in the same room together. And a lot of times we're just that nudge and that constant cadence of accountability. So in some respects, StateStat could or could not have been the place where open data landed in the state of Maryland. To Beth and Brian's credit, I think we were really blessed that they were able to sort of combine the two, because I'll talk about some of the synergies we've been able to get from that. It could have existed in the Department of Budget Management, could have existed in the Department of Information Technology, but we're an entity that cares about data, we're an entity that likes to review data, and we're an entity, most importantly, that believes in openness and transparency. So I'll talk a little bit. This is our hackathon for open data and the Bay. So one of the great success stories that we've had is BayStat. So in the state of Maryland, the Chesapeake Bay has its own ethos, right? It is, apart from the Orioles, it is the thing that binds all of us together and makes sure that we are really on the same page. If we did surveys in the state of Maryland, the one thing that would come out over and over again is that everyone, regardless of party, regardless of where you are in the socioeconomic ladder, you care about the Chesapeake Bay and you want to see it cleaned. So we run a BayStat meeting. We have 4 separate cabinet agencies that come into that meeting, as well as folks, scientists, folks from University of Maryland, nonprofits. And so for a long time, we struggled with how many different sources of data we were pulling together for BayStat. And we have 4 different agencies reporting. We have our template, then one website would look a little bit different than another website, and then another website would have a different number. And we have one super user in the state of Maryland who is on that website about every day, and Beth will recall it very fondly. The governor is on there all the time. Why is this off? What is going on? And we were going more crazy than he was with all the different requests he had as to why any number might be off by 1,000 out of 1,000,000 and some. And so we're blessed with our Department of Information Technology. Barney Krukoff is here, who's in the audience. Barney worked to make sure that we were able to get all of the data for BayStat into the portal. And the agencies now update that data directly in our Socrata portal on their own. They went through training to make sure that they were getting it right. And then the portal is our single source of truth, and it drives all the websites for all the agencies related to any BayStat data that we have, any data on the Chesapeake Bay. And it's done a couple things for us. One, it cut down on all the dings that we were getting from the governor about mentioning that the data was inconsistent in different places, which drives everybody crazy. But it also helped us with all of our advocates in the environmental community. For years, we argued in Maryland about which data set was correct. It really sort of just eliminated that. Everyone agrees that there's always some imperfections in environmental data, but what we have there is as close and as good as you can get. And we just are lucky to have someone like Barney who's working to make sure the whole thing comes together. As a result of that, we're able to pull off some pretty cool things. So we did a Hack the Bay challenge. Because all that data is in the portal, we worked with the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. We brought together young folks from across the state and had them develop apps about what they thought was the best way to really help clean the bay and some innovative things that they do. We celebrated the winners in the governor's mansion. The governor gave the awards out himself. And it's just one of the many ways that we're able to use the open data resources we have as a way to get citizens engaged. Another great example we have sort of from the same thing is we have a school shed initiative, right? So the governor's notion was almost every single school in the state of Maryland is within a mile of some tributary or some river or some small stream or creek that's flowing in the Chesapeake Bay. And we've got an environmental literacy program in the state where children are learning about environmental education inside the classroom. So let's get them to, like you adopt a road, let's adopt one of your streams. And so the schools are buying in and getting that information and adopting the streams and going out and doing local cleanup efforts. And we have all that data in there so that they can see what they're doing, where they're doing, and the impact that it's having. As far as my staff are concerned, we also like to get out there and do some of this, the work on the hackathons. We worked with Hack Baltimore recently. We run something called StateStat, right? And the whole notion is there's someone in almost every agency in state government that is focused on veterans. And we basically provide the format on a quarterly basis for all those folks to come together and talk about how we reduce veteran unemployment. It's one of the governor's 16 strategic goals. It's a critical one. There's never been a better time for it. It's probably one of the most interesting stats we run because everyone in that room is so committed to helping veterans and making sure that we can connect them with resources, connect them with job training, connect them with skills, connect them with job opportunities. We've done tremendous things to just do one-off things, like we had a 100-day Operation Hire where we partnered with the private sector to just make sure that we were doing as much as we could to hire veterans. And at the same time, we built into the bureaucracy ways that we could change state government that will outlast any administration to make sure that it's easier and veterans are getting a leg up in state hiring practices. So my folks went out and built a simple application for Hack Baltimore to make sure that we could show where our one-stop and career centers were for veterans. They can get some extra assistance and help there so that they can go out and find some jobs. This is our goals dashboard. We have 16 strategic goals. This is powered by Socrata. The governor is exceedingly committed to each and every one of those goals. We really run all of our meetings and our memos are sort of the overarching umbrella behind them are these goals. I really enjoyed the mayor's presentation tremendously. I think the only thing I would disagree with is I think it's just as important to show the things that you're failing at as the things that are on track, right? The thing that we have and we're so lucky to have is a leader who's willing to just go out there and say, guess what, we're failing at this one. So there are goal sites in all 50 states. Every governor has a page up there that says this is what we want to do, this is when we want to do it by. And I think the municipalities do this better than the states do by a lot. But for the states, 49 of them have goals pages, but they don't tell you how they're doing, right? So in the state of Maryland, we have a 70,000 person organization, billions and billions of dollars that you get the keys to when you come in. And everyone will tell you what they want to do and when they want to do it by. But the difference maker is telling you whether or not you're succeeding, whether you're failing, or whether you're on track to accomplish what it is that you're doing. And it's a new way of leadership that the mayor represents. It's a new way of leadership that we believe is here to stay. And I think that's why it's so critical that the open data component wound up in StateStat, because we believe in openness and transparency. And these two movements on performance management and open data coming together and colliding is just tremendous for us. I think performance management has always had a core group of folks in government who wanted to see it happen and some stakeholders who really wanted to see it happen. But the open data movement has allowed us to reach new people, to get new people engaged and interested. Forever we had so much of this data sitting on someone's C drive and on their PC inside their bureaucratic office. And now there is a movement inside state government, young and old alike, and from outside there's a push from the private sector that we didn't have before to get the data out there. We were going to talk a little bit about the future and what we see as the future sort of on the horizon. We have a long way to go. We've done some great stuff. Beth did phenomenal stuff in the state of Maryland. We think we've built on everything that she's done. I think what we don't do as well as we should yet is combine performance management, open data, and our budget. So StateStat influences the budget, and we weigh in and we jump in on certain things, and we help the agencies, and it's a big value added that we provide. But our budget process in the state of Maryland, has essentially run the same way that it's run for 30 years, and it needs to be blown up. It needs to be performance-based. It needs the infusion of the open data and showing what it is that we're funding in a really transparent way, and showing that what we're funding are the things that are working, or what we're funding are the things that aren't working, but we know the infusion of personnel and resources is going to turn that tide. So in the StateStat room, the answer sometimes in the end is that the metric is going in the wrong direction because you don't have the staff or the resources. But it's just never the first answer, right? The first answer is always, what can you do better? What can you realign? How can you make sure that you're using what you have most effectively? And then after we argue it out and battle it out, then a lot of times we come to the same conclusion. It is a resource issue, and we need to better align what we're doing so that we can make sure the budget is reflecting both the governor's goals, what we're learning in each meeting, and that we're being open and transparent about that through the portal in every possible way that we can. With that, I'm going to stop and just
Wow, well, that was
up.
great. Thank you so much, Matt. And I actually pointed to Pam from Washington State, who is leading the efforts around Results Washington there, and they're struggling with some of the same issues around how do you, and I think it's interesting because you're talking about citizen survey, you're talking about how do you improve transparency into how you're investing in priorities, and there really is, I think the cities is where we're going to see probably the ability. I know in Baltimore they're doing performance-based budgeting in a much more robust way than we could ever imagine doing at the state level, or at least right now conceptualize at a state level. But what is it? What do you think are the things that Matt? Like what will it take in Maryland or for states? Is it just about visualizing your budget and letting your budget sort of tell the story of how you're investing in priorities? Or is it really about the sort of David Osbornean, here's how you do performance-based budget. If your programs fall below the line, they get cut. I think there is a real practicality issue. We all work for elected officials, and I think it's really hard for elected officials to say, that small after-school program in the basement of that woman in West Baltimore, we're going to cut that because it only serves 7 kids, when the outcomes may be that all those 7 kids are going to end up staying through high school into graduation. And so how do you sort of strike that balance between sort of the political demands on what you're doing, what the data is telling you, and then really how much access you have to be able to do the work in the budget that you'll need to do?
Right, and I think in the state of Maryland, the fourth piece of that is, or anywhere, is the culture, right? You got to know the culture in which you're operating in, and how long it's been ingrained, and how long everyone has been used to it, and how long the people that are in charge of the budget have really been there. Because if there's one group that almost always survives transition changes, it's the budget folks, right? Because the first thing you want to do when you get in is get your own budget in place and figure out how to do it. And so you generally have much longer tenure in those groups, particularly in state government, in order to just have things not change. And I think for us, it's about getting more of the information out there, right? Our budget is completely unintelligible to the normal citizen, and even to lobbyists and people who are paid professionally to do it. It is exceedingly difficult to get that information and figure out what the state is really spending money on. Linking that to the priorities and the goals is twice as hard. And so, my personal belief is that getting it out there, getting in the hands of citizens, reporters, journalists, and others, where they can actually make all those links, and we can make all those links, is the first step to starting a discussion where everyone says, this is not the way that we should be spending our money, and you start having the debates on the ways that you should be spending the money that aren't at the 10,000-foot level about just school construction in general, or whatever the issue might be.
And I think there's a little bit of irony there, because I think that if you probably surveyed your citizens, there would be an expectation that you'd have a better handle on what you're
100%,
doing, right?
Yes.
And so I think that what they're doing in Kansas City around citizen survey is really interesting, because they're asking the citizens for their feedback, and then they're driving their performance around the areas where they're not satisfying their citizens, right? Mm-hmm. And so And is that a way to get at budget? Are you sort of in the background saying that you're investing more in these areas? That's why you're seeing a +5. That's why you're seeing the needle move in these areas. And that is there a jump that you can make to budget, or do you have to be very literal about it and say we have X number of dollars going into these programs? And then how do you connect that back into the citizen engagement piece? Because not only do you want to survey the citizens, but you also want to continuously kind of engage them in that dialogue. So how do you?
Yeah, we have a great anecdote that just happened this past year. So we had a SCS14 meeting. It was all about our neighborhood preservation division and about just code enforcement, property maintenance, vacant buildings. And we put all this data out there. We maintain the dashboard. We hope that someone is watching. We live tweet our SCS14, just hoping that people pick up the nuggets of information about that. And we went to a public budget hearing, and historically those have been people just from advocacy groups coming, sort of pleading with the council, please don't cut my, program for recycling, please don't do this, don't. But a woman actually stood up out of the blue, and I think Kate was at this session, and she said, hey, listen, I see that the number of property code cases coming through 311, that's just been rising over time, and she just started quoting all this data. And Kate texted me and it's like, wait a minute, this woman, she's quoting our SCS14. And I mean, we felt like, we were like, whoa. And, and at that budget proposal, in that, the budget she was specifically talking about were personnel. And just because of across the board cutting, we had cut 6 property code inspectors, just, kind of taking a little bit from every department, as a lot of agencies do. And she made the case that, hey, don't cut these people. Look at their caseload. Look how much citizen engagement there is around this topic. And council put it back in. So that was like the first time that we saw somebody use data that we had produced and we'd put out there to the public to make a budgetary case. That's one anecdote. We have a long way to go. And our finance department and budget office they've created a 5-year financial plan. The city managers really tasked them with working with us to help make those connections. And I think that it just takes time. You're right. It's totally cultural change. It's making the dollars and the outcomes in the same conversation.
Well, and I would just add in too, and Julie mentioned all of the really salient points there, but the challenge for us, and I think for many cities and probably for many states, is that the last 6 years are a time period of incredibly constrained resources. And so even if we had perfectly aligned, here's our outcomes we want to reach, there is no extra money. And so right now with a 1-year budget, we're really focused on, the most impact we can make is those decisions at the margins, like keeping 6 code enforcement officers or adding a little extra dollars in for demolition. It's not to do a total reshaping you can't do in 1 year, even if you had a set of council who said we're willing to cut in difficult places. But I think part of the goal with looking out 5 years is we can actually start to shift over time the funding away from the things that are lower priorities and toward the things that are higher priorities. And we recently had a different sort of citizen engagement forum that was a sort of game-oriented, they sat around a table and talked about visioning and did a little game allocating dollars, looking at the 5-year model, and we presented up front to them in that session, by the way, here's the priorities as stated through the citizen survey. I was shocked. They turned around and in the visioning, I was facilitating one of the tables, and they started from those priorities as their starting point with everybody says that we all think this is the important thing, so we should figure out how to get more money there. And that was powerful to them in a way that I think if we'd gone up and said, well, here's our council priorities, I think they'd have been like, okay, great. But to see their own, even if they'd never personally taken the survey, see that information reflected back to them, they just took it and ran with it and said, okay, well, if that's what we think is important, let's figure this out.
Yeah, and I think about the conversation that David Eves led yesterday around sort of where in the stack our work sits. And, this whole conversation is all about how we're using data internally in government to drive results for citizens. And I think that, honestly, the performance piece is how we sort of penetrate the stack. If we can't start at the bottom of the stack, this is the way that we can really work towards getting into the entrenched culture of government and letting data sort of be that shared platform where we can start thinking about, from the perspective of data, how we can drive change, produce results, but really impact decision making, because that's where I think the sort of rubber meets the road. I could talk to these guys for hours, but I would love to like bring in some of you. So if there are any questions, do we see a question up here?
I can just shout.
Yeah.
So Snapper from the city of New Orleans. I have a couple questions.
Can I get you a microphone so I can hear you?
Yes. This Snapper from the city of New Orleans. So first of all, how often do you guys survey in Kansas City?
It's an annual sample that's administered quarterly. The sample's broken down into a quarterly basis.
Okay, so you're getting feedback constantly. That's great. So the next two questions I think would be for any of you is, did you have any challenges making your existing performance management system fit into the Socrata platform? And why I'm asking this is, in New Orleans, we have a very robust, I think, performance management system. We're tracking over 100 outcome measures. We have 300 plus performance measures we're tracking throughout the year. We're now driving goals down into the department. And we anticipate that'll be quite a lift and lots of challenges, sort of shifting all that into an open platform. And then that last piece about driving the performance down into the departments, have you found occurrences where departments, absent of stat programs where lots of other people at the table, they're using the data in-house in a non-public forum to manage data? I think there's a lot of demand in New Orleans for that, for some departments, and I'm curious about your impressions and observations there. Thank you.
Well, with regard to adopting, I mean, yeah, there certainly was a shift that we had to make. We had to conceive of everything in that framework. I will say, the benefit of, I guess, being early adopter, a lot of our initial things, we were like, this isn't working. We went back and said it, and then they came up with the next version that did. So they adapted to us, I guess. But we are still kind of processing it. Starting earlier this year, because we built out our dashboard iteratively, a few priorities to align with our KC-STAT calendar. So we started last October. I think we, launched our our most recent set of priorities in June. So I mean, it was, little by little, and it was early in the year that we were like, we're still doing a slide deck for these KC-STAT meetings, and that's still necessary. I mean, there are areas that we're delving into that are one-off. Bring the stat to the table. We don't necessarily want to track it forever and ever. So, but we were finally like, why are we doing this? We're duplicating some information. So we started really relying on both at the same time. The dashboard and then the slides are more explanatory or delving into additional pieces of data. So that's been a huge shift for us. And we're actually, in our weekly performance management meetings, we've just been having this discussion as we've been here about how we want to move the same direction there and use the reports as more of an ongoing, live data type, situation, as opposed to these constant reporting,
And I would add, we actually started at the highest level with our council priorities. We're still working on how we're going to incorporate all of those, hundreds of metrics that we collect from the departments, what we're going to do, how we're going to get that reporting framework. I mean, I think the tool is robust enough for it, but just, getting people to report into the system, I think that's, right now, we're still, SharePoint, Excel based. So on that level of granularity, so we started at the top and are trying to move down. So that's kind of the way we've attacked it.
And just quickly on our end, we have some of the integration problems. We have been an Excel-based format, and that came from the city, and there was simplicity and some beauty in that, right? And that it costs nothing to get up and get started. And then at the same time, we're coming to the end of an administration, right? So, and as we started looking with the agencies about what they do to get that information in Excel for us, some of them are reporting on 500-600 data points a month. A lot of them have developed customized systems internally to have 20-30 different databases feed that spreadsheet. So what we've been working on in the interim is one of my staff members, Josh Exler, is here, has been working on a script to kind of pull that information out of Excel and put it into the open data platform, so that we can make it easier on the agencies, right? Because having a fight with them as the administration's coming to a close is a little bit of probably the timing is not ideal. That said, to your other question, I think we're lucky because the state's so ingrained in state government, but anecdotally, the Department of Juvenile Services is one of the agencies that manages to our data on a regular basis. It's not even our data, I shouldn't even say that, because it's their data. That is what they use to manage that organization, and it works. And the anecdote that I can tell you why it works is, as many accusations are going back and forth in the gubernatorial race in the state of Maryland right now, not once are they talking about the Department of Juvenile Services? And this is the first time in the last 5 or 6 election cycles for governor that reforming the Department of Juvenile Services wasn't one of the top 3 things that someone was running on, because it works to manage the numbers.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that when we were there, we knew that what we were doing was working when we were invited to internal agency stats. We saw them in the Department of Transportation, we saw them in the Department of Health, and we were brought in, and it was not just coming in to see that they've replicated the process, but that they were using the same body of data. And one of the things that we tried to really emphasize at the frontline level was that if your data is disconnected to the realities of the work that's happening on the front line, then what you're doing is not working.
Yep.
That you have to constantly make sure that what you're talking about is valuable, not only to the executives, but to the actual people who are either delivering that service or are the practitioners in those fields. And what we found was a lot of agencies in the early days were kind of just feed the beast mentality. Just like, here's the data that's easiest for me to get out, and this is what I'm going to give the governor's office. And once they realized in the room that they would get a lot more benefit out of having this regular routine access to the governor's team and to the ability to access those resources, that they started to really shift what data they were using. And I do want to talk about a little bit about how to snap in your programs into technology. And I think that one of the things that we talked about yesterday was that there is no sort of one size fits all, particularly for performance management, because what you're doing in New Orleans is amazing, and you go deep on a lot of really critical issues. I think about your housing stat. I think about the things that you're doing in New Orleans. It's a lot different than what we're doing at a state level. It's a lot different what we're doing. And so what we want to do with people who are using the open performance tool is really to create kind of a methodology in and outside of technology. And so that's one of the things that we work with our teams when we come in there, and you'll have Chris working with you when you're doing that work, is to figure out what is the best way to use the technology with the least amount of pain on the organization, because we're all fighting a battle with the organization first, right? And it's not, it is a collaborative environment, but they don't need any extra work. And we don't want to be a tax on what they're doing. We want to be able to empower them to be able to actually make decisions better. And so figuring that out is hard, but it's hard. But once you get through it and you get to the point where Kansas City is, it starts to become part of the regular business. And then it really does pay huge dividends, because they start to see the results in much more real time, in a much more concise way, and then they all of a sudden have this tool to share these stories with the public. And I think that that's really important, because they've had difficulty figuring out a way to show people the investments that they're making in programs that are making a difference in people's lives. And that storytelling piece, I think, is the most critical piece. I think if you talk to O'Malley, I think if you talk to the mayor of Kansas City, you'll hear that the storytelling is what has kept the sort of drumbeat going both in and outside of government. So, was there some other questions?
What kind of outreach efforts to engage the public in these surveys are being done? Is it the case you just sort of build it and people come, or are you doing outreach and actively using other sort of communication channels to bring people in and engage them?
We, for the citizen survey, it's a random sample, so we don't necessarily want to bring people to it who aren't, who don't get it, who aren't in the sample, and it's triggered by mail, and there's a phone follow-up that increases the response rate, and we've been lucky to have a high response rate. It averages just under 50%. So, and I think as we've pushed more attention to it, I think even more people have become aware of it. But on the outreach side, generally, yeah, we are really working to try to supplement the input that we get with more qualitative information, because that's one thing on the citizen survey, and that's one of the reasons we're pursuing this academic partnership, is that we look at this data and we look at it, and we have these great conversations. At the end of the day, we're like, so what is moving the needle here? And sometimes we have a really good idea, and sometimes we feel kind of lost. And so we've got a citizen engagement platform that's kind of a general polling / open feedback mechanism that we've used, and I think that's an area that we're trying to put more resources toward, a citizen engagement generally.
All right, we are getting the wrap it up. So I want to just thank, what a great panel we had today and a really great discussion. So thanks, everybody. And I am looking forward to the next session.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.